Speaking to a Commons committee this week, CFL Commissioner Randy Ambrosie not only asked for a bailout of either somewhere between $30 and $50 million, as has been well documented and we have discussed on this show before. What was new and what was interesting and what was potentially troubling was that Randy Ambrosie says if this money doesn't come, the very future of the CFL is in jeopardy. Do you believe that's a true statement, or do you believe that's hyperbole? We're going to dive down that rabbit hole. The idea that a bailout could be the difference between the CFL living or dying, which seems to be the interpretation if you read what Randy Ambrosie is saying, is pretty scary. Steve Milton, you're a member of the CFL's Hall of Fame writing wing. Do you believe the CFL is really this close to potentially dying?
Well, I don't think it was framed in terms of the bailout necessarily if they don't get it. Killing what I think he said, if they don't get it and there is a cancellation, or what he meant, and if there is a cancellation of the 2020 season, it's in really good a chance of dying. And I would think there's an element of hyperbole to that, and in the sort of really good chance, but I would say there's definitely a chance of it from the people that I've talked to within the league. The private companies in a lot of ways can't put a lot of money into it, and it's really going to hurt the public companies as well. And there's 3 of them in the league, and by that I mean the teams that are held co-op. I would say being out of mind for a year is going to be one of the biggest problems. And then, of course, trying to catch up from the losses that they incurred during that over 2021. He was intimating there might not even be a 21 season. I'd be surprised about that. I think there would be certainly one in some form or another. But, all the polls show that it's a gate-driven league, and 28% of people would go. Now, that wouldn't be, the polls wouldn't be directed just to CFL fans. It's probably a little higher of the number of people who would go to a game. But let's say it's only a third of the people. Well, of course, that's how you're probably going to have to start because of social distancing anyways. That is a real problem in a gate-driven league. I would say chances are it could kill the league.
Rick, you agree with that it could kill the league off, a missed season and no bailout?
Yeah, it could. Let's face it, this league is driven by the gate receipts. And if large groups of people are not able to come together, that means heavy losses for the Canadian Football League, whether it's, a truncated season this year or outright canceling the 2020 season. And if 2021 is also scrapped because of a second or third wave or whatever it is, think about not only the millionaire or billionaire owners that own some of the teams, but as Steve mentioned, those community-owned franchises. Those franchises will be taking heavy financial losses, and some, like the Saskatchewan Roughriders, have tens of millions of dollars in reserves, upwards of, I've seen, $30 million. Those co-op-owned teams are going to take a big hit. So how much bleeding are those teams and the multimillionaires willing to take, even if they took a year and a half off? Do they fold the league and come back? That's an option, but it would look completely different. And is there an appetite from all the ownership groups to do that?
Let's finish the circle here. Bubba, you agree?
Well, I kind of don't agree in some ways, and I almost am beginning to think that having a season not at all, is maybe the best way to go. Maybe it sustains the least amount of losses in terms of finances and jobs. I mean, we're already in a situation where in Canada, unemployment has reached 13, 14% at this point. How many people just in April lost their jobs? And you're talking about, I know there's a cultural thing with the Canadian Football League that has been, that we're trying to hang on to, but maybe that's something to hang on to for next year, to say that, there will be anticipation for a 2021 season in Regina and in the Albertas, here in Hamilton, and maybe in Toronto, you can rally that strength as well too. And of course, Montreal has new ownership. So I'm wondering if stepping away for the year is maybe the smartest thing, because playing a half a season might incur more losses to some of these owners.
Here's the question that I have about what was said yesterday and what I'm struggling to try and understand. If they try to play a year, I understand the losses that the CFL is going to incur because you're paying player salaries and you don't have people in the stands. Rick and Steve, you talk about the gate receipts. I mean, that would be a massive amount of losses. But if you can't play the 2020 season, I don't mean play it without fans. If you can't play it, Randy Ambrosie apparently said to the Commons Committee yesterday that the league cumulatively is losing 10 to 20 million dollars. So if you don't play and you don't pay the players, where is this 30, 40, 50 million dollar loss coming from?
Well, that's the analysis that I've been struggling with a little bit. And one of the problems is you're not sure what your obligations would be to the players. If you look at the CBA, they pay by the game, but that's really a mechanism. Is it a philosophy, right? Is the real underlying philosophy that we pay these players and then they don't have necessarily guaranteed salaries. The only part is if you get a bonus up front and you get it and it's guaranteed, that's the only part that's guaranteed. The rest that can be cut at any time. They're still working that out. And that's one of the criticisms that came during the Commons yesterday was you didn't bring the players here to talk about this. Well, they've kind of broken off talks and only started again on Tuesday. So that was part of an issue. The other part is the word loan never came up. And it's only come up once before.
Sorry, what word, Steve?
Loan.
Okay, yeah.
And it's never come up. And even if you made it a long term thing, and I think people would want to see that. It's only come up once before, and that was right after we did our show. The commissioner called, and I asked him directly, "Would you consider a loan?" He said he would. He would, and that would be on the table. It never came up again, and I think that's a really bad mistake on their part visually.
He said partnership, and Rick, do you understand? Do you know what a partnership literally means? Because
I do.
I'm not sure I know. It's a great word. I don't know what it means.
I think a partnership is two or more entities coming together for something good or something bad if they want to go down that route. But listen, this is the Canadian Football League asking for tens of millions of dollars from the federal government, with the only thing in return, from what we've seen, is an initiative to promote anti-bullying measures or supporting community initiatives. And the Canadian Football League and many other leagues for that matter already do that. So what the government is getting in return is the continued existence of the CFL, in which Randy Ambrosie said that the economic impact of the league is more than $1 billion a season, which I'd love to see that in black and white and how that's breaking down. But the fact of the matter is that the league is asking for something with very little in return. I think they would have won a lot of people over, especially the public, to say, hey, we want X amount of money, whether it was the 150 or the 30 for this season or whatever the case is, and said, and we're going to pay that back over 50 years or 40 years, whatever the number was. They would have won over a lot of other people, but right now they're up a creek with no paddle, and they're looking for a lifeline, and it's just not happening.
Rick, it seems to be I agree with you totally, because I think the optics here just don't look good. And we discussed this a couple of weeks ago, that if you're going to ask for this kind of money and say that you're going to repay and just basically in sort of goodwill measures, it's just not good enough, especially in the time that we're going through right now. Had the CFL maybe this back in the 80s when things were okay financially for everyone, and you made that kind of a gesture, well, I think that might have been a much more acceptable. Here's the thing that maybe they've gone down this rabbit hole, if we like to use that term here. Have teams and have the Canadian Football League, have they been knocking on the doors of their corporate partners and said, look, right now we're in trouble? Bell, I can't remember the gambling site that they deal with. Sorry?
Isn't it Proline?
Proline, the Ontario, provincial lotteries company. But we need money. We need money we need this 30 million. And I mean, is it kind of, and I will use this word loosely, is it kind of the lazy thing to do to go looking for financial assistance from the federal government when you should be knocking on the doors of your corporate partners and saying, we need help right now? Another thing too, that quickly I'll say, we're talking about this word partnership. Would it have been a better look if Randy Ambrosie also had the Players Association
100%.
with them speaking to the federal government? That seemed to me, it sounds like we got a strained relationship between these two sides right now, and certainly we need a time for union if this league wants to continue for 2020.
I say 100%. Does anybody disagree that it would have been better if a Players Association rep was sitting beside Ambrosie? I think that's a million times better look.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And of course, things fell apart not fell apart, but they had a disagreement. I'm not sure what it's about. I don't have that information. But they began talking again on Tuesday, and he did mention that. But yeah, that part of it was very, very flimsy. And when we get back to the loan part, guys, I wouldn't necessarily say you'd have to say, hey, the whole part of it has to be a loan, but you could say some significant chunk of it is. I mean, that's where the CEBL, of course, they're not asking for very much, and where they said, hey, it's a totally forgivable loan to get through it. As far as I think the partners, there's no doubt in my mind they've already seen a lot of they've already got their upfront money from their partners. That's the money they're spending to pay any salaries, which they are paying at the moment.
No, sorry. That's the money that they would have been getting regardless. But
it is. But I think they've had those discussions in getting that money as well. I'm sure.
I'm just saying, in times of need, and we see this in many situations in life, when you're dealing with your corporate partners and you're going through real tough times, it's like, we need more. We need more. If we want to keep this going, I really need your help more. And again, if it's a loan or however it comes across, I just think that in this time right now, and I put out polls on my Facebook and my Twitter, and they've been booming, guys. They've been booming. And even football fans and lovers of the Canadian Football League they just do not believe that this is the time to be calling for help from the federal government. It just seems to be the tone that I'm getting from a lot of people.
There's back to the partnership aspect of it, though. I was shocked that the Players Association was not alongside Randy Ambrosie in the House of Commons. This is their league as well. If there's no league, they're not playing. They can't go to the XFL. The AAF is done. The NFL, I mean, their windows are closed for 98% of those players. I was absolutely floored that the PA was not involved in the pitch to the federal government. Big mistake.
I think that also looks bad on the PA as well.
Yes.
Right.
But at this point, you can't. But Steve, you're right. But at this point, you can't be parsing it. I mean, if you're fighting for what we hear is the very future of the league, figure out your differences after. Those two sides should have just said, look, let's go talk to the House of Commons. We're in trouble, and we'll sort out other stuff after. But we got to put on a standard, a face together here.
And it's funny because when the talks resumed this week, I've talked to some people on both sides, kind of. And that are kind of in it, and both of them have said, it's the common overriding threat to us that brings us together here now. And I think you're right. I think all you guys are right. I think they probably needed to present that. They needed to present that to the people that are making the decisions. The other part of it, I think, is that there's a lot of centering on the fact that some of the private teams are owned by guys with a lot of money. First of all, some of those guys are getting older. Right, particularly in Vancouver and in Hamilton. I mean, they're I can say that because I'm their age, but there's that, and they've got their families to think about and all that kind of thing. And are we going to apply that same standard to anybody else that gets any help?
That's a great question, and it's a fair question, Steve. I mean, it is a fair question because there are other places that are getting bailouts as well. Absolutely. And I don't know that we're holding it to the same standard. The argument that's being given is, okay, but some of those are what people would consider to be more essential things than a sports league that is an entertainment, that is a luxury item. But let me ask you something, Rick. Let me jump to you for a second here, because Steve said something a moment ago about the players and about the costs here. And the idea that, okay, if we don't play, theoretically, maybe legally, you don't have to pay the players, and so you can save some money. Steve suggests, yeah, but is that philosophically how we want to go here? And I think that's a good point, too. You don't want to tell all your players you mean nothing to us. But if you're talking about the very existence of the league, if we pay you now, even though we're not playing, this league is going to go bankrupt. Or we can't pay you right now, but guess what? We're going to come back next year and we'll be able to. So we're really sorry, but hang in there. Which is the right answer?
Well, from a player's perspective, I think many of them would want to get paid now, but it depends on where they are in their career. If they're just starting out, they're looking at the long term. They'll say, okay, I'll take a haircut now for better times down the road. But if you're a 35-year-old, 10-year veteran of this league, you're thinking, I want to cash out now. Give me my money and I'll ride into the sunset. So I think from a player perspective, it depends where you are. From a league perspective, an ownership perspective, a fan perspective, you're definitely looking to the long term. You want to ride this ship until you can no longer ride it anymore, decades to come. So, it all depends on what side of the fence you're sitting on.
Yeah, go to Hamilton's team and take a look at who the notable stars are, right?
Yeah.
Go across their linebacking core, all of the youngest of which is 31. Speedy Banks. Now, all those guys are playing as if they're in their peak of their career, but at a certain age, you don't know what layoffs are going to do. The suggestion is that even a shortened season could do one of two things. It can, for an older player, it can actually help them because they get a little extra rest moving into it and train. But it can also, you're a few months down your career a little bit, and a whole year and a bit down your career a little bit. When we know at after 30, the chances of a sudden decline are something, and you've got most of the real bankable stars in the league are sort of in that age right now, because it takes a while to become a bankable star. There's some great players, but not that have been there for 4 or 5 years, right? Because we tend to not get some of those players till they're 25, 26 years old. And suddenly, by the time they're 4 or 5 years and have really established themselves as much as a household name that a CFL player can ever be, they're in their 30s or 30s.
The other thing to consider too is, regardless of how old a player is, they're looking at these headlines, they're reading the tea leaves thinking, is this league going to cease to exist permanently? Yeah, give me my money now and I'll go on to my second career or third career, whatever the case is.
That's a big danger.
But
And there's one more thing that we haven't. Sorry, go ahead, Bubba.
I'm just saying that the president of the PA, Solomon Eliminian, I mean, he told these players 6 months ago, hold on to your money. We were talking about veteran players. These guys should know better. If this is the case, that you've got to bank yourself. I mean, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago with the league about having a piggy bank and being prepared for tough times. Well, I'm hoping that these veteran players, and some of them we know personally very well, have been banking for that rainy day, which obviously this league is at right now, because there's no possible way that these teams can afford to, or at least this league can afford to pay its players right now, whether it be the younger guys, the veteran guys. I'm sure bonuses are owed and must be paid. But in terms of salaries right now, they cannot pay any of these players. They have to be prepared to pay them for next year and make a plan for that. And the players have to be ready to accept that, especially when you're a professional athlete, nothing's guaranteed. That's that. They all know that. That's part of pro sports. And unfortunately, that's where they get.
We also know, and we got to wrap. We also know, and we'll get into this maybe another day. We haven't even talked about the complication of how you do a league if a lot of the players are in the States and they may or may not be able to even come here. That's a whole other different complication that may render this whole thing moot because they couldn't play anyway. We don't know. We're going to go around and we're going to go the opposite way we usually do. So, Bubba, you're going to be up first. Very quickly, we need a number. Randy Ambrosie is absolutely, unquestionably the face of the CFL right now. The Players Association, as we've said, not really front and center. It is Randy Ambrosie's league. He is the one who, whether he wants to be this guy or not, essentially is now in the position to try and save this league. Scale of 1 to 10, 1 being poor, 10 being great. How do you rate Randy Ambrosie's performance to this point?
Well, it's certainly fallen and this is just my personal opinion, it's fallen from where it was a year ago to where we are right now. I think you're batting 500 at very best right now.
5 for Bubba. Rick?
Yeah, I was thinking 4 or 5. Listen, this isn't an easy task. I think they've gone about it the wrong way. He has put up, a good front and has not, allowed his emotions to get the better of himself. The business-like approach is, well warranted at this stage. You don't see a lot of panic in his face. There is some concern, obviously, but I would give him 4. I'll give him a 4.5.
Okay, and Steve?
I think I have him at about 5, and it's kind of a dichotomous thing, because I think behind the scenes, inside the league, directing it, those kinds of things, holding to message, all of that stuff, it's very high. Outside is what most of us see. And so that is probably, it falls down a little bit, but I've got nothing to compare this to. I've never really seen this before. I guess you can compare it to the leaders of the country so far, but I've never really seen something like this that they have to compare it to. So when you average that out, it's right in the middle to me.
Yeah, I'd go in somewhere in the 4 range as well, and it would be higher because I think Randy Ambrosie is an optimistic guy, and he is a pleasant guy to listen to. But I think, as we talked about, I think not having the Players Association alongside has been a big mistake, and I think the way this was presented has in large measure been not great. But I do believe he has a chance to redeem himself. There's still time, and we'll see how that one goes. Thank you for joining us. Subscribe down below. You can see the little button there that says subscribe. We love it when you are joining us for the home games talks here, hit the little bell too. That notifies you when one of our videos comes up. We're here 3 times a week. We hope you keep coming back. Have a great day. Enjoy it. We'll talk to you soon.